Hello, everyone, and welcome to another video here on the Sports Daily Media Network YouTube channel. I'm your host, Sean Vowles, and I've got Joe Mead with me tonight. And Joe and I are previewing the Peach Bowl between the number one Indiana Hoosiers and the number five Oregon Ducks. Both teams had relatively easy games in the quarterfinals where they'll meet for the second time this year. Joe, we've seen the rematch factor come into play in the other college football playoff games. Do you think that that's a big deal here?
Uh, Probably, to be honest. I think it was explicitly mentioned by both coaches. Now, whether you want to say that's mental warfare or not, I don't really know what to say. But it happened last year, too. I know probably a different scenario, but Oregon, Ohio State, too. I don't want to remind Duck fans about that one. So it's something at play. It's something we saw with Alabama and Georgia as well earlier in the year. I do think it does mean something. I know Indiana definitively outplayed Oregon and Eugene on October 11th, but I think Oregon's grown a lot since then. I think aside from the Iowa game, they really haven't played a bad game since then. And even Iowa, I mean, winning at Kinnick's never a bad game per se, as Indiana fans know from this year as well. So I look at this matchup. I really think it's going to come down to the O line and Dante Moore for Oregon. I think last time they got nothing really going. What people forget is that score was 30-20. 7 points was on a Mendoza pick six. So is Indiana's defense going to dominate Oregon the same way? I suspect not, but if they get enough of them, I think this game has a severe advantage toward Indiana.
And that was sort of the game where Indiana proved that they were like way significantly better than last year and that they were definitely going to be a college football playoff team. In that game, Joe, Oregon's offense did not score in the second half. They did get the pick six. But in terms of like the overarching theme between the rematches, there's been four of them in college football this year. The SEC championship, like you mentioned, where let's say for argument's sake that the teams are relatively similar in talent, the loser of the first one won the second one. Ole Miss and Tulane did rematch in the first round of the playoff. Don't really think that the talent level is comparable. Ole Miss won again. And then in the two other rematches in the college football playoff, we had Alabama beating Oklahoma, the reverse of what happened in the regular season, and then we had another rematch. Oh, Ole Miss beating Georgia after losing to them in the regular season. So if the trend continues here, the trend is in favor of Oregon, but in terms of trends, Signetti stopped the bye teams losing trend. Um, something is going to give here. I think personnel wise, there's a few differences since that last game. The starting running back for Oregon, Jordan Davison, will be out, and then Indiana is missing two defensive linemen that played in that game. Kellen Wyatt's been out for a while, and then Stephen Daly, who got injured after the Big Ten championship. But Joe, I think both of these teams coming into the game are going to have a lot of confidence because of how the quarterfinals went. I think Oregon played solidly, great defensively. Offensively, I think they could have probably been a little bit sharper. They still win by 20 plus, and then Indiana just absolutely demolished Alabama. But the other semifinal, which is going to be starting in a few minutes here, they sort of had like super high energy, high possession, high scoring games last time. These two got their starters out of there with some time remaining. So they also have the extra day of rest, with this being on Friday night. But anything there really that personnel wise, I think you made the argument that Oregon is better than when the first game happened. I think Indiana is too. It's going to be the first and second quarterback taken in the NFL draft. I think a lot of statistics here are pointing to this being a pretty even game.
Agree, Sean. I think the only thing, like I mentioned, that could blow this open is if Indiana's pass rush completely
Yeah.
eviscerates Oregon's
And
O line.
and Indiana is just a little bit better in most statistics. They played very similar schedules in the Big Ten, and their common opponents were very similar too. Indiana won by um, one score at Iowa. Oregon won by one score at Iowa, and I'm sure there's other ones down there. But Oregon's only loss this year was that game to Indiana where they really got outplayed in the second half only. So, but Oregon's been building some confidence, Joe, even before the playoff wins against Texas Tech and James Madison. They were definitely in the ascendancy towards the end of the year. The 5 seed is just like a really good spot to be when it comes to draw. You get the 12 seed, and then you get some momentum going into the 4 seed, which you're probably not all that worse than to begin with. So Oregon has the argument can be made that Oregon is here because they had a good draw, but of course that could end if they take down the number one team here. But how do you think that plays into effect for Oregon?
Really know, to be honest, Sean. I think the biggest thing if you're Oregon is the psychological edge, right? Indiana, let's face it, they've had it coaching wise, player wise, over everyone they've played this year, including the defending national champs, Ohio State. Um, I think Oregon, this is a game. I think they kind of overthought themselves on October 11th. I'm not saying that's why they lost, but I think it factors in. I think they kind of didn't really have a plan B. I think in this game, you have to have a plan B, and I know they will. I think the Will Stein and Tosh Lupoy, the game we're watching now, Ole Miss Miami, you don't have quite the chaos that Ole Miss has had. Oregon, that's going to play to their advantage.
They've done a really good job of not really letting that noise get to their players.
Now, Indiana, on the other hand, had none of that, not even a distraction. So I think, slight edge to Indiana on the mental game here, Sean. But one thing I will say is I think talent composite-wise, Oregon top to bottom is more talented. Now, if you want to go position by position, I think you're more even. And then clearly at quarterback, I think Mendoza's shown more in clutch moments than Dante Moore has. So to me, Sean, I have a really hard time thinking this game's a blowout, like Indiana's other games have been, aside from Ohio State.
I don't think. I think Indiana could end up winning by like 17 or something, but it really won't be a blowout.
Right.
Like they'll be up 10. Oregon will be down 10 with the ball to start the fourth quarter. And like if they score a touchdown, then it's game on. And if they don't, then Indiana's going to win. But execution wise, Indiana's got Oregon has good numbers in third down and all that. It's just not as good as Indiana. So Indiana is better in some of these statistics, but I don't know if it's that big of an advantage. Like, Mendoza is the best quarterback in the country. There's a good argument to be made that Dante Moore is number 2. Like,
right.
If Mendoza isn't sharp, he could definitely be outplayed by Dante Moore. So I think it's going to have to be sort of a all units on all units are going to have to be on time for Oregon. Like they can't Alabama couldn't run the ball, blowout. Like Oregon's got to run it, they've got to pass it, they probably need to hit a big play, maybe a special teams play and to get them over the hump. But my final score prediction, Joe, is going to be the exact same score that we saw earlier in the year in Autzen. I'm going Indiana 30, Oregon 20.
Wow. I think this game is going to be action-packed. Just because of that, though, I don't think the score is going to be quite up to 50. I think you're going to be in for a more low-scoring affair. I do think Indiana is more confident, not necessarily, what's it called? Not necessarily slowing it down per se, but being a little conservative because I think they know they have an advantage in the trenches. They know Mendoza's not been faced by the big moment, nor has Dante Moore, let's face it. So when I look at that, I think Indiana's going to be patient. I think conservative is the wrong word, patient. I think they're fine, being in a close game. They're fine getting this to the fourth quarter with a 3-point lead, maybe even a 3-point deficit, then kind of just letting it wear out. Kind of like the Ohio State game. That game was never really sure for either team, let's say. But Indiana didn't do anything out of the ordinary, I thought, in that game. I think aside from the one penalty, which rarely got called, it was on that 3rd and 7 where he chop blocked into the guy.
On the defense, yeah.
On the defense, yeah. I think that was the one mental error they made. So I think this game's going to be really low scoring. Give me Indiana to win 20-16. I think you're going to be into a lot of field goals. There's going to be a lot of decision making on 4th and 1, 4th and 2 on what to do. And I think with both lines being what they are, you might see field goals be at a premium.
And a bit, there was a field goal in the last game that I believe Dan Lanning elected to kick a field goal on 4th and 1 to tie the game instead of trying to attempt to take the lead. That seemed to be the turning point there. So it should be a good one. We'll be back in a couple of days to recap this one. That's all we have for you today. Thanks for tuning in.